Alright, so I'm officially back here on my own channel. Feels good to be home with you guys. So if you don't know, over the last couple of days I was filling in for Kyle Kalinske over on Secular Talk on his channel. We have had a ton of new subscribers who've joined the channel, so hey to you guys. Welcome to the channel, I guess. But with that being said, I just want to go ahead and get into the new content that we got for today. So over on Twitter, under the leadership of the self-proclaimed free speech absolutist Elon Musk, we have had just a little bit of controversy surrounding censorship on the platform, which kind of contradicts with the entire narrative that he was trying to sell people when he spent over $40 billion to buy this website, which was in and of itself just a complete valuation, and he's gotten himself into a terrible financial position anyways just by buying Twitter. But anyways, so recently we had some elections that were happening over in Turkey. I think they actually just took place yesterday. We've gotten some of the results from that. Looks like it's going to be heading for a runoff between the current leader of Turkey, Erdogan, and his opposition. So we've gotten the results. It definitely was an underperformance, at least from what the polls were saying, for the opposition within Turkey. But Elon Musk, before this happened, decided to sort of play a little bit of a role in terms of the information that was able to be spread to Turkish users of Twitter. So here is pointed out by Matthew Iglesias, okay, not somebody who I'm usually a big fan of or anything like that, but I think he's got a somewhat decent point here, and he's responding to Twitter, okay, the official Twitter Global Government Affairs account here, and they initially said, "In response to legal process and to ensure Twitter remains available to the people of Turkey, we have taken action to restrict access to some content in Turkey today." That's kind of interesting, because this is the same guy who was promoting, obviously, the Twitter files, which I talked about on this channel, and I do find some issues with a lot of the things that were reported within the Twitter files. Some of the other stuff seemed to be sort of like inconsequential nonsense, but, you know, I reported on the Twitter files. I think that that was worthy of discussion, but this is basically Elon Musk doing exactly what some of the main focus of the Twitter files was in critiquing the previous version of Twitter before Elon Musk took control of it. So he points out here, he says the Turkish government asked Twitter to censor its opponents right before an election, and Elon Musk complied, should generate some interesting Twitter files reporting. And he responds here, okay, very agitated, clearly. He says, did your brain fall out of your head, Iglesias? The choice is to have Twitter throttled in its entirety, essentially banned, or limit access to some tweets. Okay, which specific tweets were you limiting access to? Okay, because it would be one thing if it was like a direct threat of violence. Doesn't seem like that's the case in this circumstance, right? It seems like this may just be opposition to the current government within Turkey. And he says basically the choice here was to have it throttled in its entirety or banned, or to limit access to some tweets. Which one do you want? Okay, so I mean, again, essentially what he's talking about here, and this is something I've talked about before. I mean, this is not the only example of this that we've gotten from Elon Musk under his leadership at Twitter, but essentially what he's saying here is my version of free speech doesn't actually have anything to do with free speech as a principle across the board. It's just whatever any government around the world decides is acceptable speech within their own country, right? So I mean, here in the United States, it would be a little bit easier to do this analysis, because you could say, okay, we're just going to abide by the First Amendment, for example, and that would be something where I would say, okay, if you're applying that standard across the board, at least you're being somewhat principled. I think that the First Amendment here in the United States, if I was ever going to praise the Constitution, I think we absolutely nailed it on the First Amendment here. And so you could have that sort of a standard here in the United States. Now, whether or not that would actually work on a social media platform is a different discussion. I do think that you also need some sort of TOS, or terms of service, in order to make sure that these social media apps don't just turn into like Nazi hellscapes or something like that, where it's unusable because of the amount of deranged shit that's constantly being spread on those. But, you know, I also don't agree with censorship of people who just have different, you know, political opinions, right? I'm an open socialist political commentator. I would be one of the first people, presumably, in order to be, you know, suppressed on one of these social media platforms if they were just suppressing any content that was a threat to the status quo, right? So I'm against all of that censorship. I think the First Amendment is somewhat of a good guideline, but what he's saying here is he is just going to abide, not even just by the First Amendment and apply that across the world as a sort of baseline standard, but just whatever any government around the world wants him to censor, whether that's Turkey, whether that's Israel, whether that's Saudi Arabia, whether that's Russia. I mean, any country around the world, I'm just abiding by the laws. I'm taking down any content that specific government doesn't want to be up on it in order to avoid being banned? I mean, it has absolutely nothing to do with a principled stance on free speech. It is the opposite of having an across-the-board principled stance on these issues, and it gets even worse from there, because he doubled down on this and sort of like explicitly stated what his actual position was. And we're also going to get to a little bit of a contrast in terms of what previous Twitter before Elon Musk did in a similar kind of situation here. But first he says this: by free speech, I simply means that which matches the law. He says, I am against censorship that goes far beyond the law. If people want less free speech, they will ask the government to pass laws to that effect. Therefore, going beyond the law is contrary to the will of the people. So there's a little bit of a problem here, right? The first thing that jumps out to me is that, you know, most countries, or a lot of countries, are not like perfect democracies where the will of the people is just always going to be implemented, right? I mean, that's what we're talking about here. If you have a principled approach to something like free speech, then you couldn't possibly rely on any government around the world, especially more authoritarian ones like Erdogan's government in Turkey, which has almost complete control over the media ecosystem over there. You can't just rely on that and then turn around and say, oh, well, if the people of Turkey didn't want this stuff to be banned, then they could simply change the laws within Turkey. Or if the people of Saudi Arabia don't want their content to be suppressed in Saudi Arabia, then they can what? Simply, I guess, go up to Mohammed bin Salman and ask him not to ban their content or not to throw them in jail for some Twitter posts that they're putting online. I mean, it's a completely absurd standard at face value, and obviously has no attachment to actual free speech. So now we get to the alternative here, which is like, okay, well, what could they have done in this kind of a situation when you're faced with the choice between either getting banned entirely within a country potentially, or having to throttle some sorts of speech that said government doesn't want to be on the Twitter platform in their country? Well, we have a couple examples here. Okay, the first one here is pointed out by Jimmy Wales. He says, in a similar situation, what Wikipedia did. He says, we stood strong for our principles and fought to the Supreme Court of Turkey and won. This is what it means to treat freedom of expression as a principle rather than a slogan. So there was a period of time in Turkey where Wikipedia was banned as this process was playing out in the courts, but they stuck to their guns. They actually believed in free speech in this sense, and they went to the Supreme Court of Turkey and won the court battle. Okay, so again, it's not as if you just had to roll over and you had to do exactly what the Turkish government wanted you to do in this circumstance. No, there are alternative options that have been successfully demonstrated by other companies like Wikipedia. And it's not just Wikipedia. As pointed out here by Josh Marshall, he says, on Elon Musk's claim that everybody does it, meaning censorship, depending on what government asks you, what the government asks you to do, he says, actually, in 2014, Erdogan made the same demands of Twitter, okay, not just Wikipedia, but previous Twitter before Elon Musk, and Twitter refused, and he did briefly ban the site. But the whole thing backfired on Erdogan. Twitter also told Turkish users ways to evade the ban. Okay, so I mean, previous Twitter was less censorious than what Elon Musk is doing right now, right? You have Wikipedia as an example, which is willing to go take the fight to the Supreme Court within Turkey and won that battle, okay, in order to actually protect free speech within Turkey. And then you have another example here of Twitter, which was basically challenging Erdogan on this, not giving in to his demands for censorship, and then also was telling people within Turkey how to get around the ban that was put in place. Okay, this is what it actually looks like to fight for free speech. Now listen, I'm not even a fan of the previous ownership of Twitter and the way that they were operating things, but Elon Musk, even by his own standards of what he came in as the owner of this website after he purchased it, and his own standards of what he said he wanted to do in terms of protecting free speech, he has been worse than the previous owners of Twitter. And so we have an example of that as pointed out here by Matt Binder. If you actually look at the data, so here's the initial claim by Twitter. They say Twitter 1.0 censored more than what was legally required by countries they operated in. That is the difference between Twitter 1.0 and Twitter 2.0, and what most critics of Twitter's Turkey decision fail to realize. And then if you actually look at the data here, Twitter is giving in to government demands more often under Elon Musk, and it really doesn't even look like it's that close. So, I mean, again, the whole Twitter Files saga was based on the idea that Twitter was giving in to government pressure in order to censor specific things that, might be damaging to themselves or might be, you know, beneficial to their political opponents. That was the whole idea of the Twitter files. And Elon Musk is not only doing that, but doing it to a more significant degree than previous Twitter, okay? And not just here in the United States, but around the entire world. Again, that's not a standard for free speech. If you're just saying whatever any government wants us to do, okay, no matter how authoritarian or dictatorial said government is, if we are just giving into those demands, that's not a principled stance on free speech, okay? You might as well just say that you are like a government-run operation at that point, right? If you're just giving into whatever the government standards actually are that they ask you to do. And again, this isn't the only circumstance where we have seen a similar thing like this play out. There was also this one, which I've talked about a bunch of different times on this channel. They say here from Vice, free speech absolutist Elon Musk censors BBC documentary that was critical of India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi on Twitter. So, I mean, again, he's done this on multiple circumstances. You can look at the actual statistical breakdown and see that he is doing this even more than the previous Twitter, okay? And his whole selling point when he spent $44 billion or whatever the fuck on this website was to be the free speech absolutist. Not only is he not a free speech absolutist, he is the exact precise opposite of that, and yet you still have many of his supporters who are still siding with him to this day. So we have other updates on Elon Musk and Twitter that I'll probably get to in a future video. He just hired a new CEO, which is already backfiring on him because a lot of these right-wing supporters that liked him are sort of like mad that he hired somebody who had connections to the World Economic Forum and who was a woman and who was definitely going to be pushing for basically the same exact platform that Twitter 1.0 was, to use the words of Elon Musk. But this all takes me back to like this famous drill tweet that was passed around, or I think it was a drill tweet, maybe it was somebody else, but I think it actually was Sean, okay? It was a Sean tweet. I'm gonna stick with that. But basically what he was saying is that Elon Musk thought that he could come into this platform and that, you know, the previous ownership of Twitter was just solely based around like censorious, a censorious nature, and was trying to push some sort of a liberal agenda, and that they were acting on behalf of the government. And really what he didn't realize at the end of the day is that it's just a corporation, okay? And the people who are working at the upper echelons within Twitter, the CEO, the executives, right, at this company, they were doing things that would be, in their view, in the best interest of their bottom line, of their profit motives, okay? And so now that he is taking control of this platform, he is just going to, over time, and this has been demonstrated, going to come to the realization that in order for this to be a profitable company, I am just going to basically end up reverting back to all of the same tactics that previous Twitter was. I mean, so this is what we're seeing play out right now. Elon Musk, he obviously doesn't really have any principles at the end of the day when it comes to free speech, and he's basically just backtracking on what was his own main selling point for buying this platform in the first place. I mean, it's honestly amazing to see.
Everyone is saying good Politic guy has the best Politic. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying